Hi there, everyone. Good afternoon. In this session, we are going to present you our policy report titled Promoting an Inclusive Transition to the Circular Economy, a case for immigrant entrepreneurs in Montreal. Before that, we would like to briefly introduce our team. My name is Penny. I have Emma, Mune, and Zola with me this afternoon. So, first of all, we would like to mention that our sponsor of this project is municipal government, Ville de Montréal. Specifically, we have been working with Service du Développement Économique, the Department of Economic Development Service, over the past 6 months. They're also attending online today, and we would like to thank them for their presence. And this is the policy challenge question. How can the City of Montreal inform and mobilize its diverse entrepreneurs and include them in the ecological transition? More specifically, how can Montreal ensure their participation in the transition from a linear economy to one that is more circular? So this is our presentation outline. We will start with the definition of circular economy, as circular economy is the thematic focus of this project. Second, we will talk about the case of Montreal's immigrant entrepreneurs as they are adopted as our target population to argue in favor of an inclusive transition towards a circular economy. Then we dissect the central theoretical lens of our project, which is the concept of just transition. And lastly, we will present the 3 gaps we identify in Montreal's circular economy ecosystem throughout this project. And for each gap, we tailor 2 policy recommendations. Hopefully, with these recommendations, will eventually be incorporated in the government's action plan in the coming years. So to begin with, what is circular economy? You might have heard of this term. The concept can be very technical, but our team tries to present the most understandable one. Please look at the visualization of the concept on the right side first. So traditionally, our economy is linear. As you can see the line there. Producers take resources from our environment, use these resources to make products and services, and these products then flow into the market for consumers to purchase. And after their use, no matter how much they use these products and services, they simply become waste to our environment. So this is a so-called take, make, waste lie of our current economy. This model is not sustainable, as you might notice, because our resources are limited. But in most cases, the use of the products are not maximized. And thus, some resources, they're just thrown away and thus wasted in this process. However, in a circular economy, the production and consumption model becomes a circle, as defined here by the European Parliament. The circle is realized by sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials and products as long as possible. So simply put, these resources, they keep going back to our economy until they are completely exhausted. So as circular economy is a quite new idea, in order to let business communities understand this concept in Quebec, actually there are 12 circular economy strategies that have been developed. Examples of these strategies include, like eco-design, responsible consumption, product rental and sharing. They are particularly important because they are used by government actors in Quebec in identifying how business could adopt the circular transition. So after learning the concept of circular economy, we would like to present our target population, immigrant entrepreneurs. In this project, we define immigrant entrepreneurs as any individual who is or has been a landed immigrant or permanent resident and who owns and operates a small or medium enterprise in Montreal. The triangle on the left side helps you understand the intersection of this project. So in our mandate, circular economy and diverse entrepreneurship are explicitly given to us, but the 2 concepts in our view are still very broad. So we needed to define an intersection where these 2 topics can meet together. In current scholarship, it also really addressed these 2 topics together. As a result, we decided to focus on immigrant entrepreneurs, as we believe this is a good starting point to connect the 2 mandates in the context of Montreal. This is a slide. In this slide, we visualize for you the current reality of immigrant entrepreneurs in Montreal and the municipal government's circular economy agenda. On the left side, you can see we provide the specific reasons why we chose immigrant entrepreneurs as our target population. As you can see here, 1 out of 3 Montreal residents is immigrant, and 28% of all immigrants in Quebec express the intention to start a business, to open a business, and that figure is actually higher than the Canadian-born entrepreneurs. And 1 out of 3 business owners are immigrants in Montreal. Again, that figure is the second highest in North America, only second to Silicon Valley. So with these, we argue that immigrant entrepreneurs present an untapped opportunity for Montreal to realize its circular agenda if policy levers can incentivize them to embark on the circular transition. But what is the city's circularity agenda? On the right side, we provide an overview of that. Montreal has instituted its Montreal 2030 and climate plan as the highest level policy to commit itself to circular economy. And in a circular economy ecosystem, major actors, as you can see here, include Recy Québec, the Quebec government agency dedicated to waste management. And we have CERIEC. This is a study center of intersectoral research in circular economy, which is hosted in ETS, an engineering school based in Montreal. And then we have our sponsor, Ville de Montréal. So according to the metric used by Quebec, Montreal's circular economy actors, they have self-reported having a lower circularity score than the world average. So therefore, Montreal, our sponsor, is working really hard to increase its circularity. The point we would like to make through this visualization is that currently in Montreal, the two agendas there developed parallelly. None of each side really considers incorporating one another's agenda. And with our efforts, we hope to help the city bridge this gap, as we drew here, as you can see there in the middle, by incorporating Montreal's immigrant entrepreneurs into its circular economy agenda. Now, I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Mune to talk about the central theoretical lens of this project, Just Transition.
Thank you, Pang. So in this section, I'll really try and discuss sort of the main theoretical approach that we've taken, which is really the just transition. And this really tries to bring together two things. On the one hand, it's diversity, and on the second, it's the ecological transition. So I imagine you might be wondering, well, what is the just transition? So just as a bit of a background, the just transition started or the term itself emerged in the 20th century. And this is when coal miners started losing their jobs as the economy moved from coal towards becoming more oil-based. So in a more contemporary context, what does the just transition mean? Well, it focuses on the inclusion of vulnerable communities, as well as addressing the green economy. In this report, the just transition really tries to bring together the two intersections. So on the one hand, diversity, and then on the other hand, the circular economy. As you'll see in the blue circle on social justice, there's really two components that we can think about here. There's the distributive and procedural justice. With regards to distributive justice, this considers how the costs and benefits are shared across the different sectors. And then equally important is procedural justice, which is still under the social justice component. And this tries to think about who's at the decision-making table when decisions are being made. So that's really about the procedural justice. And the main point here is that the process is really important, just as the results are. And then the last component you see is the ecological transition, and this really just tries to focus on the circular economy. So we bring together these two components to think about diversity as well as the circular economy. If you now look on the far right side, we have two components that we think about here in terms of the benefits that can be given to Montreal, and that's social, thinking about the social as well as the economic benefits. So on the social benefits, we believe that a just transition can really help Montreal in terms of building a more sustainable city as well as communities, and that really addresses SDG 11. And then on the other hand, we can think about how a just transition can really help with more responsible consumption as well as production patterns, and that's SDG 12. Now, if you follow at the bottom right, we think about the economic benefits from adopting a just transition approach. And what we've found is that research does demonstrate that diversity can be a key driver in terms of in terms of innovation as well as creativity. So my main point here is that by applying a just transition, the City of Montreal can become a pioneer actually in specifically addressing the circular economy as well as diversity at the same time. Now, when we think about the challenges that immigrants face, they tend to be higher than native-born immigrants or native-born people in Canada. So in the following section, I'll try and unpack the different gaps that they might be facing, and I'll specifically focus on three, which is that of funding, knowledge, as well as agenda setting. And this might help us really understand the different challenges that they have. So I'll start off with the first big gap, and this is the funding gap. So here we have three components, and that's one, the lack of funding for the service sector, the lack of funding for SMEs, as well as a general problem with communication. So firstly, we found that there's really an underfunding of the service sector, despite the fact that most immigrant entrepreneurs are actually based within this sector. The existing circular economy funding ecosystem typically favors businesses that are either agribusiness or tech firms, so essentially not service sector businesses. The second component that you see here is that SMEs tend to have limited funding options to enable their transition. And the funding ecosystem right now tends to favor businesses that are large, so in terms of revenues and the number of employees. And what we found from our data in Quebec is that most firms are actually micro firms. So by that, we mean firms that have less than 5 employees. And then lastly, the last component that we found in the funding gap is that communication isn't easily available to entrepreneurs. And so many entrepreneurs are genuinely unaware of the different funding options that they might actually have. For instance, we found that there's a key fund within the ecosystem called the Fonds EcoLeader. And this has supported over 1,000 companies since its inception in 2019. However, from our stakeholder engagements, we did find that most entrepreneurs weren't aware that these funds did exist to enable their circular economy transition. I'll now move over to our second big gap, which is that of knowledge. So we identified that there's an absence of knowledge disseminators, which you see in the first box here. These disseminators are supposed to be responsible for sharing information about the circular economy and the best strategies to adopt it and implement it within their businesses. And usually disseminators are supposed to be proximate to the community which they serve. So that's one big issue in knowledge. The second issue is that of between technical versus practical knowledge. So what we identified was that the knowledge, the main actor in terms of knowledge production, which is Cyriac, my colleague mentioned earlier on, which is based in ETS, an engineering school, mainly focuses on the technical aspects. And that's the main sort of knowledge producer in terms of circular economy in Montreal. And most of that information tends to be more academic. What we think, though, is that, or the gap that we've identified, is that immigrant entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general actually require practical information that actually helps them in terms of their business operations from a day-to-day perspective. And then the last component within knowledge gaps is that of making the business case. So by this, I mean there's limited information about the financial opportunities that can be attained by adopting the circular economy. Entrepreneurs are mostly confirmed about two things. On the one hand, firm viability, and then on the other, it's really just the revenues. So these are the key things that are missing within the knowledge gap. And then the last thing that I would like to address here, and this is our final gap, this is agenda setting. So with agenda setting, what we identified was that the current multi-stakeholder roundtable on the circular economy, which is called the Pôle de Constatation, does not really reflect the diverse interests of all businesses in Montreal. And from our research on the Pôle de Constatation, there's an absence of the inclusion of ethnic business chambers. And then the last component within the agenda setting is that there's really a lack of disaggregated data to capture the state of diversity in Montreal in terms of the different circular economy initiatives that may exist. And this really inhibits the municipal government from understanding the nuances as well as the challenges that all these entrepreneurs could be facing. So now I would like to conclude the gap section and hand over to my colleague Zola, who will really address all the different gaps that I've gone through by providing the solutions.
Thank you very much, Mune. To address the aforementioned gaps, more specifically the funding gap, the knowledge gap, and the agenda setting gap, our team has drafted 6 recommendations in total. And as Peng mentioned, we have 2 recommendations tailored for each gap as potential solutions and acceleration opportunities for Montreal's transitional efforts towards the circular economy. So our first recommendation to address the funding gap, we recommend the creation of a circular economy microcredit loan for immigrant entrepreneurs. Our first recommendation seeks to address the limited funding options that exist for SMEs and the lack of adequate promotional resources for these existing funding options. Therefore, a funding stream that is tailored towards mobilizing SMEs would be an important policy lever, precisely because our research and stakeholder consultation indicates that financial opportunity and the argument of the financial opportunities that lies within the transition of the circular economy is the most convincing argument for immigrant entrepreneurs to transition into the circular economy. Additionally, immigrant entrepreneurs face heightened barriers in adopting circularity due to their unique financial challenges, such as no credit history or low annual revenues, which further excludes them from accessing circular funds that presently are available. So this recommendation seeks to promote the adoption of a circular transition among immigrant entrepreneurs by offering them a funding stream that is more accessible and accommodating to their needs, especially for those that don't qualify to traditional financial institutions and the circular funds that do exist. This recommendation favors a microcredit loan because microcredit institutions in Montreal already have an established relationship with immigrant entrepreneurs, and therefore this proximity is ideal as it solves the promotional gap we highlighted earlier, on top of introducing a new funding stream for immigrant entrepreneurs. Furthermore, I'd like to highlight that this recommendation favors a microcredit loan versus any other funding assistant type, such as a grant, for example. Hence, our research indicates that grants are in general more selective and they offer recipients less autonomy to choose which aspects of their business they want to invest in. Our second recommendation to address the funding gap is the launch of the Go Circular competition for immigrant entrepreneurs. While several competitions do exist in Montreal, such as the Circular Initiative Awards, few of them address the intersection between diversity and circular economy. Therefore, even though these competitions do create alternative funding streams, they fail to specifically target immigrant entrepreneurs. So therefore, the Go Circular competition seeks to expand the scope and include more participants by appealing to early phase immigrant entrepreneurs as opposed to established SMEs. We believe that this is an opportune time for younger immigrants to get involved in the development of the circular economy transition in Montreal. The winners of this competition will receive a financial award. However, a key feature of this competition is that it will also include smaller prizes to all participating contestants, such as a subsidized enrollment into an incubator, for example, to further assist them develop their business ideas. In terms of our knowledge gap, we have drafted 2 recommendations. And the first one is the creation of a consumer-facing website that features circular products in Montreal. The consumer-facing website will create an opportunity for the municipal government to promote more awareness and interest in circular products among consumers by giving businesses more visibility and an enhanced reputation. This, we believe, will also incentivize entrepreneurs, particularly immigrant entrepreneurs, to adopt a circular business model to satisfy the increased demand that would come out of a feature on the website. It is also envisioned that the website will compile circular products and services so that businesses can easily reach their target consumer base, primarily seen as digitalization and digital technologies have been identified in literature as a key enabler for upscaling the circular economy. This recommendation, we believe, presents several benefits, but a key one is that for the city, it'll benefit the city in that more businesses will be incentivized in participating into the circular transition. And our final recommendation to address the knowledge gap, we recommend the introduction of a circular transition training program moderated by diversity-driven incubators. As Mune pointed out earlier, in the current ecosystem, the key knowledge disseminator, which is CERIEC, distributes highly technical information that is most useful to academics and policymakers. Therefore, this recommendation, we believe, will fill this gap by introducing a specialized program that promotes capacity building and training among immigrant entrepreneurs seeking to adopt a circular business model. The program will also serve as a knowledge hub that transmits information to immigrant entrepreneurs about funding, but also networking opportunities that exist in Montreal. And we would like to highlight that diversity-driven incubators are specified in this recommendation because our consultation with stakeholders have confirmed that diverse knowledge disseminators are crucial as they're able to speak to the lived realities of diverse entrepreneurs. And furthermore, they're able to convey knowledge on circularity in ways that are most beneficial for immigrant entrepreneurs. Lastly, we envision that this program will create an opportunity for these entrepreneurs to engage with one another and create knowledge for future immigrant entrepreneurs that are interested in the circular economy. I will now pass it on to Emma to detail our following recommendations.
Thank you so much, Zola. So I will be presenting the two last recommendations, which are under the agenda setting category. Our first recommendation in this category is the creation of a circular economy business working group. And this recommendation addresses the gap highlighted earlier by Mune, that in the current framework for policy making, there's not a systematic inclusion of these diverse entrepreneurs. And this specific roundtable would allow for a space where entrepreneurs can voice their concerns and their perspectives. This speaks specifically to the procedural justice aspect of the just transition that we previously highlighted to you. So the rationale is that we need a way for business perspectives to be taken into account in developing the future of circular economy. And for this knowledge transfer to occur between city officials, academics, and businesses, we recommend that this working group should be formed and meet regularly and facilitated by the city. This should facilitate dialogue, allow for input, and an important focus should be made on including diverse entrepreneurs. In so doing, the city could include specific targets of diversity. So for example, quotas of business leaders representing different sectors, sizes and ages of enterprises, and any ethnocultural diversity markers that are relevant. The benefit, of course, will be that in the long run, the city will be able to improve its circular economy policies, both in its inclusion and also in its effectiveness. Our last recommendation, recommendation 6, is for the city to establish a data collection practice capturing the state of diversity within Montreal's currently present circular initiatives. So this recommendation addresses another gap that was highlighted earlier. Essentially, as of now, the city does not have data on the degree of diversity among existing circular economy initiatives in Montreal. And this lack of data really hinders the city from enacting evidence-based and targeted policies to improve its inclusion. Now, the city should engage a third-party organization which has the capacity to collect this diversity data. The data would serve as a starting point and internal purpose for the city to assess how inclusive its transition currently is and to be able to see where the gaps really are and monitor its progress. Now, the city already has a really useful tool, which is the Montréal Circulaire. It's a platform that already currently captures more than 1,000 circular initiatives in the city of Montreal. Therefore, we're not starting from scratch here. The city can leverage this platform and collect demographic data, for instance, the number of visible minorities or number of immigrants working for each circular initiatives registered on this platform. The specifics should be determined by the city, depending on how they would like to analyze and use this data. Of course, this data collection should also comply with any relevant government regulations and privacy legislations in place. And with that, that concludes our 6 recommendations. I'm just going to take you through 2 more slides, which will give an aggregate view of our recommendations together. So this first slide is the timeline of the positive impact for each recommendation. So what we want to represent here is when each recommendation, from the date of its inception and implementation, would start really showing positive results. In the short term, you have the Go Circular competition as well as the diversity data collection. In the Go Circular competition, we envision it being short term because we are directly enabling businesses to come to fruition with their project and directly boost circularity. The diversity data collection is also an exercise that can directly help the city address better policies to address its state of inclusion. In the medium term, we have, first of all, the microcredit loan, which was a funding recommendation. This one is stated as a medium term because we foresee that it would take some time for the city to find the accurate partners to both fund and also administer this loan. Then we have the consumer-facing website and the circular economy transition training program. These 2 recommendations are also in the medium term, as we foresee that it would take some time for the city to design and implement the programs, and also for it to start communicating to the relevant entrepreneurs and really gain traction when more people know about it. Lastly, we have in the long term our Circular Economy Business Working Group. And this working group is seen as a long-term recommendation because it really builds a network and it focuses on agenda setting and creating proximity and trust between the different stakeholders in circular economy. And therefore, it would really show long-term results in terms of enabling the city to create better and more effective policies. Now, for our last slide, we would like to show you kind of a bird's eye view of how all of our recommendations work together. So on the upper side, you can see all the activities that would be available to the immigrant entrepreneurs. And these activities actually speak to different phases of entrepreneurship. And that's not to say that each immigrant entrepreneur would go through all of these programs, but it just goes to show that we really try to think about how we can create support for diverse stages of entrepreneurship. So first you have the Go Circular competition. So this competition is for entrepreneurs that have maybe a business idea, but aren't really sure yet how it would be concretely. And it's a place where they can, experiment and fail and talk also to other entrepreneurs. Then we have the microcredit loan for entrepreneurs who have a more concrete idea of what they want to do, but just need the fund to realize it. Then we have the training, which is about consolidating an entrepreneur's skills to really deliver on the transition. And lastly, the consumer-facing website for enterprises that have already transitioned and are looking to really leverage the transition that they have accomplished by getting more consumers. On the bottom, we have 2 really important exercises for the City of Montreal. First of all, the diversity data collection, as I just spoke to, is really, really important for the city to have concrete evidence about where it's falling short, where the opportunities are, and how it can enact better policies. And secondly, the Circular Economy Working Group is also vital in ensuring that we have an inclusive approach to agenda setting and policy making in the long run and create better policies. So working all of that together, we believe that it's a really good starting point for Montreal to work towards a just circular transition and really be a pioneer on the world stage on this topic. And as we conclude this presentation, my teammates would like to join me in thanking, of course, our coach, Justin Leroux, all of our stakeholders for their time and generosity in sharing their experience, and also to thank our sponsors. Over the course of this project, we have come to recognize the challenging task of mobilizing key actors to achieve a circular transition and to innovate in this very new field. So this has given us really a glimpse into the complex work done by the SDE and the broader municipal government as they're trying to build a more sustainable city. So we really thank them for this challenge, and thank you guys for being here as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, team. Great job. Okay, over to the judges. Nadidi, are you first?
So much. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I work with entrepreneurs, as you know. So I have 2 questions. The first one is, as I was reading your brief, it struck me that many of these immigrants already understand circular economy. They don't call it circular economy, but if you work in a place like Nigeria or many of India, you see that nothing goes to waste. And I'm curious, as you delve into the sectors, you start off with saying most of them are in services and services are not prioritized, but which sectors would you prioritize where immigrants already have a natural comparative advantage and early successes? And what can we do within those sectors? So that's the first question. And then the second question, I know you alluded to universities and said, oh, it's more technical. But I was curious, especially when you think about the competitions, the funds. So many immigrants come into Montreal through the universities and then stay. So can we partner? Have you considered partnering with these universities to actually attract the young immigrants early on so that those business plan competitions directly become full-blown and full-fledged businesses? And if I can tie in a third question is, diversity and immigrants, very important, but there are some immigrants that are more disadvantaged than others. So how are you making sure that you actually get this support to those who need it the most? There are immigrants who come in very well resourced, and there are immigrants who come in almost as asylum seekers. And so their needs are quite different. So how do you ensure women, the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged, are catered to and create a level playing field? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your bundle of questions there. But yeah, I'll start off with the first question with regards to the service sector. So that's the sector that we kind of identified as that's where most immigrants are. As you maybe would have noted in the report itself, so you have 53% of immigrants within the within groceries, owning groceries. And then you also have about 56% of them within transportation. So maybe we'll try and think about how we can provide services within the circular economy. So, I mean, we spoke about the 12 strategies, right? So maybe which of the 12 strategies are applicable to those different sectors? So maybe for the grocery store, I can try and think of maybe eco product design, right? Maybe where to get those products so that maybe your packaging is a bit more sustainable and environmentally sensitive. And then maybe for transportation, we might also have to review some of the toll strategies as well that are available and applicable to that specific sector, and try and get that information as proximate as possible. And I think that's probably the big thing that we notice is that this information isn't easily accessible to them. So they might already come maybe with some knowledge about, you know, how to become more circular from wherever they're coming from. But maybe there's some things that they can also learn within this specific context and maybe access to the different services that would help them become more circular. So that's with for the first question.
Yeah, I think I was going to take care of that because you spoke about the support that can be provided to immigrant entrepreneurs specifically. I think in our report, we actually elaborate that if you remember, one of the figures that we just present is that 28% of the immigrants in Quebec, they have a intention to open their own business that is higher than, that's actually higher than a Canadian-born entrepreneurs. But the reality on the ground is that when you come to the actual ownership of business, the two figures are almost the same. And if you look further at the rate of closure of business, immigrant entrepreneurs, they actually have a higher rate of closure of their business. So that kind of speaks to the ease of doing business in Montreal and Quebec context for the immigrant entrepreneurs. So in our research and also the stakeholder engagement, what we found is that circular economy, like we may know the circular economy idea, but the thing is that if you cannot keep your business afloat, why would you embark on a circular transition? So that's why in the report and also in the presentation, we kind of elaborate that if you cannot solve the business barriers of doing business in general for for immigrant entrepreneurs, they will not consider the circular transition. So I think the fundamental solutions still try to help them keep their business afloat, create a more friendly environment for business immigrant entrepreneur to start their business in Montreal. Yeah, that's the answer for it.
And I'll answer the third question. It's about accommodating the more disadvantaged immigrant entrepreneurs, for example. In our recommendations, I can point to two of them. One of them is the funding recommendation, which is the microloan for immigrant entrepreneurs. And the second one would be the transition training for moderated by diversity-driven incubators. So in terms of the microloan, when we were thinking about this recommendation, we were thinking about those disadvantaged immigrant entrepreneurs that come to Canada. They don't really have no credit history. They have very low annual revenues. And so they need someone to believe in their business idea, to help them visualize the idea, create the model, but also help them understand the business, like the business environment in Canada to help them succeed. So the microloan really does help them move into that space, especially with the consideration of circular economy that could be new for them or not even as viable. It really creates that opportunity. And we also wanted to highlight that we're recommending the city to partner with institutions that already have an understanding of the experiences of immigrant entrepreneurs, right? So for example, the diversity-driven incubators, they already have an idea of what an immigrant entrepreneur, the kinds of barriers and opportunities they bring to this country. And so, yeah, I think that's how we would address that community.
Leslie or Natalie?
I think we could just go down the line. So one of the things that I was wondering about is how transferable this model or this set or suite of recommendations might be to other audiences later. And I know you mentioned this in your report that might be a next step. So I'm curious as to what your recommendation might be, right, in terms of figuring out how transferable this is, and then figuring out, like, how do you kind of move on to, like, the next generation of these programs.
I can speak to part of that, and if anyone wants to come in. But I think one of our recommendations that we really believe in and I think is really transferable is really about the data collection, because we had to do this project kind of almost in the dark, because at the end of the day, we couldn't ourselves go ahead and collect the data on, okay, which, like, is it really diverse? Is it really inclusive? How many immigrant entrepreneurs are leading this movement? And there could be many, as a matter of fact. So I think that recommendation about going out there and really collecting this data is really replicable, whether you're fighting for women or you're fighting for other kinds of diversity. I think that's really the one that we hold dear to our heart, and I think it's really important, whatever is inclusion you're trying to promote. Yeah.
Anybody else on that? Okay. Natalie?
So I'm going to piggyback on some of Nadidi's questions. I'm fascinated by the business of waste. In the news recently, we saw several waste management sites be closed down in the last few months for lack of capacity. And at the same time, we have some real significant structural issues in recycling here in Quebec with our one bin strategy, where we lose the uniqueness of each type of material, and at the same time layered onto an export market that does seem to want some of our waste, but not all of our waste, and only if it's high quality. So in that context, I wondered what your perception was of the business opportunity of waste. What waste categories do we have in Quebec that are high volume, high value, that weigh, right, that their weight prevents us from exporting? And where would that opportunity be? In what categories of waste do you think there is a great business opportunity for immigrant entrepreneurs?
Okay, I can take that question. So in our stakeholder consultation, we spoke to this organization called Eco-Entreprise. So it's really interesting, this model. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basically in Quebec, businesses pay for the recycling of the waste. So they go through this organization called Eco-Entreprise, and they pay a fraction of, I think, the volume that they sell onto the Quebec market. And then this organization then kind of gets all the money, and then they go and arrange for the curbside picking up of recycling and processing that. So what we found in this consultation is that actually this recycling aspect is more relevant to big enterprises, because the small enterprises actually either don't pay at all because they're too small, or they pay like a fixed price, you know, that's very minor. So if you're a small entrepreneur and you're not creating waste at that scale, you're actually not that incentivized to work to get more ecological packaging. So I think that's why in our report we didn't work so much on waste and more on other strategies of circularity, because for small businesses there isn't that leverage as much. And as we've seen, that immigrant entrepreneurs, most of them are concentrated in smaller businesses. So I think that's why we haven't really delved into that question.
So we do have some people online who I see Christina she has her camera on, and so she's ready, and I'm guessing she's going to be ready to go first. So for those who are with us from Ville de Montréal, if you could be prepared by turning your cameras on, you can raise your hand too, and we'll let Christina go first with questions or comments, and then we'll open the floor. Christina, go ahead.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, team. You did a great job, and it was a pleasure working with you for the past 6 months. And I think you did a wonderful job considering all the limitations that you had to work with during this challenge to synthesize it and put it together. And I'm sure that the recommendations are going to be really good food for thought for the City of Montreal in further building on their programs and initiatives. And as you did a really good job at analyzing the complex ecosystem, like you said, because it's really a lot of actors involved, and it's a complex challenge as well. It was great hearing, and I think you did a wonderful presentation as well. Moving forward, I have a question. Considering all the challenges and the city's strengths, as well as levers, what recommendation do you think would be the hardest to implement, and why? And this kind of brings me a little bit to how would you prioritize? I think you did a great job with providing the timeline and making the cost-benefit analysis synthesis. I think that was a very interesting exercise. But I was wondering, how would you go? Would you go in the same kind of timeline as you presented, or you would reprioritize recommendation for the implementation? So it's kind of a two-way question. And also, I know that you have taken out some recommendations. At least I know of one. But I was wondering if what was the reasoning for that? If you can just summarize briefly, and if you have maybe dismissed other options that we are not aware of, and why did you do so? Or maybe you later on, after you submitted your report, you came up with other recommendations that you wanted to include, but you didn't have the chance to do. But in retrospective, it's we see things differently. So this would be my questions. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. I think let me just recap your question. So first, you want to know like the hardest recommendation to implement, and also which one we prioritize and why we kind of took off one recommendation, right? So I think in terms of, I will answer first on that, which one will we prioritize? Because as Emma already spoke about, in the beginning of this project, we actually requested to collect the data of the state of diversity. And we think it's like really crucial for the project like this, because we don't really know like the state of diversity among the workforce of circular economy. And the circular economy is not even a sector. So I think in terms of the prioritization, if the government, since circular economy is a quite new idea, if the government is going to further develop this agenda, I think the data collection is really the first thing we would like to prioritize. And speaking about the hardest recommendation, and also I think it also kind of, we're gonna explain why that recommendation has partly gone, is because it is a recommendation 3. I think it was consumer-facing website. Originally, we thought of it as an application, but then we realized one thing we don't know about is that if there's a demand of designing an application used by the consumer in Montreal, we wanted it to be a consumer-facing B2C model. But if you just simply go to develop an application with nobody using it and it's just waste of your resources. So that's why we kind of tweak it to be a consumer-facing website, because in a sense, it can still go mobile. On the other hand, it is a starting point to gauge the demand in the context of Montreal. And once you knew it, as we provide a successful case implemented in Italy about the application, once the City of Montreal can gauge that demand from the consumers in Montreal, and you probably will better know like if application is visible in the context of Montreal. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, after Christina.
No more comments from online for now, but we can ask the room.
Okay, so you just keep an eye on those hands online. Anything in the room? Dan?
Yeah. So in a way, this is sort of like a question about the impetus for the project, right? I mean, it's clearly important to promote immigrant entrepreneurship. It sounds like, you know, the cyclical thing is clearly important. So maybe this is a follow-up to a question that's already been asked, but I mean, if cyclical economy is so important, why not just go in and sort of promote it for everybody in Montreal, right? And I guess the more specific question is, are there things that you would do to promote cyclical economy amongst immigrant entrepreneurs that might sort of not be things that would then be kind of effective in promoting cyclical economy more broadly? Do you see what I mean? So in a way, it's about the scaling up. And is there something about the way in which you would target immigrant entrepreneurs that would not be kind of opposite for entrepreneurs, you know, broadly understood? So I guess the two, why not for everybody? You know, Montreal isn't so big. You know, it's not like, and then if we do start with immigrant entrepreneurs, yeah.
I'll take that question. Thank you for asking that question. So the first part of the question is, why not promote it for everybody? And our hope is that we promote it for everyone, truly. And we found that the gap was that it was being promoted, but not everyone was being included. And that's where our project comes in, is to ensure that everyone is included. And I guess that's also partly answers your second question in terms of the targeting. So as you saw, and I earlier also talked about it, we have recommendations that particularly target areas in which work with immigrant entrepreneurs that have an understanding of immigrant entrepreneurship in Montreal. And so we're targeting those institutions to partner with the municipal government so that circularity is really something that they see valuable for their own growth, their own business growth, and their own, and something that's of course, will also generate economic growth for the city entirely. So,
Okay, any other questions before mine? Please stop me. No. No, I don't need to be the last. Oh, okay, let's get them.
So Cécile has a question.
Yes, hi everybody. It was maybe not a question, but more a comment or a congratulations, because I thought your work was really interesting and, well, I was struck by many things that you said. Especially, well, I totally agree with you about the data take, because we were talking about it with Virginia, and we see that it's something we need to have, but it's not that easy to implement within our service. And so it's really interesting to have like outside vision like yours to go back and work on that. So thank you for that. And also in the beginning of your presentation, you talk about the fact that most companies from immigrants were about services, and that the circular economy and the practice and the funds were oriented towards industry. And so I don't know if you have this answer, if you went into that during your research, but Do you see, because I have a difficulty to see that because I'm not that familiar with circular economy myself, but opportunities between the circularity and the services that we could focus on in order to help the immigrants to stay in their own field of business, but to become more circular? And second, do you think we should, well, I think we should, but there is the second strategy, which is pushing immigrants towards industries and how we do that.
Thank you so much for your question. So I guess the one thing that we really try to think about, and I think we try to address this through the presentation, is that immigrants and businesses in general are really focused on two things. So that's really the viability of your business as well as the financial opportunities. So I mean, we could think of in terms of profits, right? So when we think about the service sector and sort of the funding options that are available to them, we really have to try and see how, or try and create the different, or tailor the funding options that kind of speak to these needs and speak to the need for a business to continue to operate over the long term. So it's really just about tailoring those funds towards those different entrepreneurs. So one of the funds that we actually try to look at, which is a big part of the Montreal's ecosystem in terms of the funding, is a platform called PME Montréal. So that's kind of like the main interface between businesses as well as business supports for entrepreneurs and immigrant entrepreneurs as well. And one of the things that we came across was sort of the eligibility requirements were a bit more difficult, complex, and really hard to interpret. So I think when we try and think about, well, one, moving businesses maybe towards other sectors outside of the service sector, we really just have to think about tailoring those fundings accordingly so that entrepreneurs have a clear understanding about how to access the different fundings so that they do move into those different sectors.
Thank you so much.
Was
I
there a
was
second
specifically
question there too?
thinking about PME Montréal,
Or did you get them
and
both?
how we could use this to become more inclusive. So thank you for the bringing it back also.
Okay. We've got a few minutes. So, Nadidi, why don't you take your question?
Yeah, I think it was just a comment. I mean, I'm so excited about this because I think we can learn a lot from it. But there are two things I'd like you to consider, or maybe you're done. So the government can think about it. It's really around, number one, when we have this data, how do we actually set quotas and targets to ensure that we actually track and meet the needs, especially for the most vulnerable and disadvantaged immigrant communities. And then the second, and I want to come back to the earlier point I made, that there's so much indigenous knowledge in immigrant communities about recycling and about circularity. If I just use the Nigerian example, there's nothing that's wasted in an average home, right? Or even, especially the lowest income home. We'll work in the dairy sector. If you kill a cow in Nigeria, the hind, the blood, the bones, everything has an end product. The manure, everything is sold to somebody else, but it's not considered valuable information and insights. And I really think, you can't say circular economy is new. The question is who's been telling the story about circular economy, and what can we learn from the immigrants who are coming into this country to improve how our circular economy works. And so I think we need to flip it on its head, because we think it's new. It's an age-old, the indigenous people know about circular economy. So how can we switch that? Because I heard you guys say that term, it's new, do you understand? It's the definition, but I think we have to reclaim some of these terms as our own terms and say we have a lot to teach Canada as immigrants. And let's bring our old knowledge into new industries and add that value. And that's why the business plan competitions, the innovations hubs, and everything can retell that story. And please partner with the media as well. Thank you.
Please do.
I think we really agree with your second point, and that was part of our reasoning as well for the incubator idea. And I think this also answers Cecile's question about, is there it's circular economy possibility for service sector firms. And I think there absolutely is. And if we just look at the 12 strategies of circular economy, like it's not only about industrial symbiosis, it's not only about recycling, it's about doing the most with like what materials you have, right? And the fact is that there's just not enough, academic knowledge or sources of information that show that the type of knowledge that you were talking about. So in terms of those incubators, we also want entrepreneurs to come in with their own perspectives and their own ideas and kind of exchange in that space to create that knowledge that's lacking in like informal type or I think that's.
Okay, anybody else? All right, my question is about the knowledge gap about business. So it doesn't pertain specifically to immigrants. I think it's just the general knowledge gap in business about circular economy. And I guess my question is whether it's really a knowledge gap. So if the idea that people don't know much about the business opportunities in the circular economy, well, I'm no entrepreneur, but I think entrepreneurs will tell you that they don't have knowledge about a business opportunity. They see the opportunity. They see the opportunity because they see a problem to solve for somebody. And I guess what I'm wondering is whether we just don't have enough problems at the individual level, at the individual business level. We don't have enough problems to solve that we might want to solve at a societal level. And so I'm really wondering whether this knowledge gap reflects a policy gap. And not a policy gap necessarily at the level of a city, but a policy gap at the level of, let's say, the province or the country. So, for example, if the province of Quebec had more aggressive ERP policies, right, or EPR policies, extended producer responsibility, that said basically they had to account for their packaging. If you coupled that with more aggressive pricing on landfill, right, solid waste prices for landfill, and you actually then created the incentives to say, well, actually, you have to reduce the amount of packaging. Then you've actually created a problem that that businesses have to solve, and then you've hopefully created a space for an entrepreneur, immigrant or otherwise, to come in and say, here's a way to solve that problem. So I guess my question is, so it may be impossible for the City of Montreal to introduce some of these policies, but is there scope in this project for the City of Montreal to be advocating to the province or to the federal government, but probably to the province, for more aggressive policies that will actually drive the incentives that will then create or help in the circular economy? That was a long-winded way to get to that question, but that's the question.
I think I can take care of that if my team member has anything to add. So I think one of the thing we identify in this project, especially for small and medium enterprises, is that a lot of time, as you say, the business opportunities are there, but they're for the large corporations. As immigrant entrepreneurs who work for establishing a small and medium enterprises, for them, even they know about circular economy concept, it just, if you can bring the profitability or the financial argument that is compelling enough for them to make that transition, it's really hard. So in our case, because we're looking at a small and medium enterprises established by immigrant entrepreneur, I think the knowledge gap is still there. They might know this concept, but they will not consider the profitability or feasibility of circular transition. And in terms of the what Montreal can do or can convey to, like a higher jurisdictional level, to adopt this circular economy agenda, I think one thing important is that if you look at the ground reality, like economic landscape in Quebec, like 99%, if I remember the data correctly, 99% of the business are small and medium enterprises. So one key strategy that can be conveyed to, I think, a higher level of government is that when you're when you want your society or your business owners to adopt circular economy, not just think about bank, not just think about big enterprises, think about small and medium enterprises, because they are the more flexible one. And I think because they account for most of the business makeup in Quebec, in Quebec. So just think about the small and medium enterprises and tailor the strategies for small and medium enterprises to adopt that transition.
Any final words? Okay, folks, we are just beyond 2:00, so this is good. Thank you very much, all of you. We'll be back in 59 minutes.